For 30 years, Eleanor Warren balanced every budget, clipped every coupon, and planned for a peaceful retirement. She thought she and her husband were finally ready for their golden years, until the IRS knocked on her door. Their $2 million yacht? Seized. Their joint account? Only $60,000 left. But that wasn't the worst part. Because the man she trusted most had used her name on forged documents. And the yacht? It wasn't just a boat. It was a lie, floating on stolen money. Now, Eleanor must decide, will she let his betrayal define her, or will she turn the symbol of his downfall into her second wind? Eleanor Warren stood by the kitchen window, cradling her coffee cup as she gazed at the perfectly manicured lawn. 30 years of marriage, and this was supposed to be their golden period. She had retired just 4 months ago after working as an accountant for 3 decades. This should have been the time to enjoy the fruits of their planning. But something felt off. The phone rang. It was Caroline. Her best friend had been calling every day since Rich started behaving strangely. "He's at the marina again," Eleanor answered without greeting. "Third time this week." "You know what they say about men his age," Caroline replied. "Either they buy a sports car or they find a younger woman." Eleanor felt a knot forming in her stomach. "I've been checking our accounts. Money's moving, Caroline. Big money. Have you asked him about it?" "Every time I do, he tells me I'm being paranoid. That it's a joke." Eleanor's voice was caught. "That he's planning a surprise for our anniversary." "You don't believe him?" "I've been an accountant for 30 years. Numbers don't lie. Even when husbands do." "Who is this James person, anyway?" Eleanor ventured. "Rich has been calling him a lot lately." "I don't know," Caroline shook her head. "But since selling the company, Rich seems to have made a lot of new friends." The sound of Rich's car pulling into the driveway made Eleanor straighten her shoulders. She quickly ended the call and composed herself. Rich entered the house wearing designer sunglasses and clothes that seemed somehow out of character, younger, flashier. "Beautiful day," he declared, dropping his keys on the counter. "Going golfing with Michael this afternoon." "I saw you on the phone in the car," Eleanor said casually. "James again?" Rich's expression hardened momentarily. "Oh, just business talk." Eleanor noticed an unfamiliar watch on his wrist. "We were supposed to have dinner with Linda tonight," she reminded him. Her sister had been planning this dinner for weeks. "We'll reschedule," Rich said without making eye contact. "A business opportunity has come up." "What kind of business?" Eleanor asked, keeping her voice steady. "You sold the company." Rich waved his hand dismissively. "Just investments, Ellie. You worry too much." He kissed her cheek, the gesture somehow feeling perfunctory. "Trust me, everything I'm doing is for us." "If it's for us, why won't you tell me what you're doing with my money?" The question hung in the air between them. Rich's smile faltered. "Because then it wouldn't be a surprise." Later that afternoon, Eleanor sat in her home office, leafing through travel brochures for the European trip they had planned for years. Beside them lay a book of home renovation ideas. Planning the kitchen remodel had been when she felt happiest. She logged into their joint account. The screen showed another transfer of $50,000 marked only as the investment. Her heart racing, she called their financial advisor. "Tom, it's Eleanor Warren. I want to know about the transfers from our joint account." The pause on the other end spoke volumes. "Eleanor? I thought you knew. Rich said you two were planning this together." "Planning what, exactly?" Her fingers tightened around the phone. "The yacht. He's been making payments on it for months." The room seemed to spin. "What yacht?" "The yacht he bought. Second wind. He said it was going to be an anniversary surprise." Eleanor put her hand to her mouth. Their retirement savings, 30 years of careful planning, was flowing into a boat she knew nothing about. "How much?" she whispered. "Just over 2 million so far." The family photo on her desk, Rich, Eleanor, and their grown children at Christmas, now seemed to mock her. "Thank you, Tom," she said mechanically and hung up. The doorbell rang. Eleanor walked toward the door in a daze. She opened it to find two suited individuals standing on her doorstep, badges in hand. "Mrs. Warren? I'm Agent Davis with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division. This is Agent Thompson. We need to speak with you and your husband regarding a vessel called the Second Wind." Eleanor's world crumbled as she realized Rich's joke was something far more serious. "My husband isn't home," she said in a surprisingly steady voice despite the inner turmoil. "But please come in. I think I need to hear this." Agent Davis handed Eleanor a photograph. There was a Second Wind docked at the marina, its polished deck plastered with yellow, as seized by IRS tape. Two federal agents stood by the boat, stern-faced, clipboards in hand. Eleanor stared at the photo with trembling fingers. The yacht was real. The betrayal was real. Her husband's joke had a price tag and had become a federal case. As the agents explained the situation in her lovingly decorated living room, Eleanor felt a strange clarity amidst the shock. The life she thought she had, built on trust and honesty, had been a facade. "Mrs. Warren," Agent Davis said gently, "the yacht has been seized as part of an ongoing investigation. We have reason to believe that the funds used to purchase it were not properly reported to the IRS." Eleanor nodded. The accountant in her understood exactly what that meant. Tax evasion. Fraud. Possibly prison. "I think I need to call my lawyer," she said, reaching for the phone. Collapse and shocking truth. The fluorescent lights of the police station buzzed overhead. Eleanor sat perfectly straight in the uncomfortable plastic chair. Her lawyer and longtime friend, Sarah Winters, whispered reassurances beside her, but Eleanor barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on Rich across the room, animatedly talking with the lawyer he had hastily hired. Since being brought in for questioning, he hadn't looked at her once. "Mrs. Warren?" Agent Davis appeared at the door. "I'd like to ask you some questions now." In the interrogation room, Eleanor's background as an accountant served her well. She answered each question precisely, her voice steady despite the emotional hurricane inside. "No, I wasn't aware of the yacht purchase. No, I did not authorize those transfers. Yes, I manage our household finances, but my husband processed these particular transactions without my knowledge." When she emerged, Sarah gripped her arm. "You did well. They believe you weren't involved." Eleanor nodded mechanically. "What happens now?" "Rich will be released on bail. The yacht remains seized. There will be further investigation, probably charges." Sarah paused. "Eleanor, I have to ask, do you want to go home with him tonight?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Home. With the man who had gambled their future without a thought. "I don't know," she whispered. Across the hallway, through the narrow window of the interrogation room, Eleanor caught a glimpse of Rich. He sat with slumped shoulders, trembling. His lawyer was speaking quietly beside him, but Rich didn't seem to be listening. One hand covered his face, the other gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. For the first time, Eleanor saw not the man she had married, but the man who had destroyed their future. A man now crumbling under the weight of it. The car ride home passed in icy silence. When they finally entered the house, Rich immediately poured himself a drink. His hand shook slightly. "Ellie, you have to believe me. This is all a misunderstanding." Eleanor carefully placed her purse on the counter. Like everything she had done in their marriage, the action was deliberate and controlled. A misunderstanding? Using unreported money to buy a yacht worth over $2 million without telling me, and you call that a misunderstanding? James said. James. Eleanor's voice rose. Your new friend? The one who appeared right after you sold the company. Rich's face reddened. He knows investments. He showed me opportunities. Opportunities to lose everything we've worked for? Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Our retirement, our security, our trust, all gone. Because you wanted to impress your new rich friends. That's not fair. I did it for us. Rich slammed down his glass. I wanted us to have nice things. I wanted to be someone you could be proud of. I was already proud of you. You didn't need a yacht to prove your worth. The doorbell rang, cutting the tension. When Eleanor opened it, her sister Linda stood there holding a casserole dish. Thought you might need dinner, Linda began, but her voice trailed off as she took in Eleanor's expression. What happened? As Eleanor explained in brief, clipped sentences, Linda's shock turned to protective anger. Rich retreated to the study, the door closing decisively. You're staying at my house tonight, Linda declared, leaving no room for argument. I can't just leave, Eleanor said weakly. You can, and you will. Pack your things. Eleanor sat at her sister's kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold tea. Her phone had been ringing all morning, Rich, Caroline, even Michael, Rich's business partner. She had ignored them all. He called again, Linda said, placing a fresh cup in front of her. Third time since breakfast. I can't talk to him yet, Eleanor said. I don't even know what to say. The doorbell rang. Linda peeked through the curtains and sighed. It's Caroline. Caroline swept in like a force of nature, swinging her handbag. I just heard. That liar, that sneaky. She stopped, seeing Eleanor's tired face. Oh, Ellie. Did you know? Eleanor asked quietly. Did anyone suspect what he was doing? Caroline sat down heavily. Michael called this morning. He said he'd been worried about Rich for months, the new crowd he was hanging around with, especially this James character. He tried to warn Rich not to spend money so freely, but Rich wouldn't listen. Rich always used to listen before, Eleanor said in a hollow voice. 30 years building a life together, making decisions together. What changed? Men like that, they panic at a certain age, Caroline said, her own divorce bitterness evident. Think a fancy boat or a younger woman will somehow stop time. The agent said there might be other purchases, Eleanor revealed. They're investigating everything. Caroline reached across the table to take her hand. What are you going to do? Eleanor looked down at her wedding ring, absently turning it. I don't know yet. But I can't stay in the dark anymore. I'm tired of being lied to. Her phone rang again. This time it was Michael. Taking a deep breath, she answered. Eleanor? Thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you. There's something I need to tell you about Rich and James. Something I should have told you months ago. Tom Jenkins looked uncomfortable in his office as he saw Eleanor and Michael sitting across the desk from each other. Files were spread between them, transaction records, investments, withdrawals. Eleanor flipped through the documents Tom handed her, transaction records, investment forms, loan agreements. Her breath got caught. Her own name stared back at her from the signature line. But I never signed this. She whispered. Tom nodded grimly. I believe Rich used your name on forged documents to authorize certain transfers. If the IRS investigates further. Eleanor felt her stomach drop. This wasn't just betrayal, it was a trap. He didn't just lie to me, she said, her voice shaking. He made me part of it. I should have questioned more, Tom admitted. But Rich was adamant you knew. "Show me everything," Eleanor said, the accountant in her taking control when the wife in her couldn't. As Tom showed the paper trail, Michael filled in the gaps. James wasn't just a friend, he was a con artist with a history of targeting newly wealthy men in their 60s. The yacht was just the beginning. Investments in non-existent companies, loans to James that would never be repaid, and worse. "How much is left?" Eleanor finally asked, her voice barely audible. Tom slid a statement across the desk. Eleanor stared at the numbers. Of the $3.8 million from the sale of the construction company, less than $600,000 remained. The room spun. 30 years of work. Their retirement. Their security. Their future. All gone. Shocking truth and the trap. Eleanor stood on the dock where a second wind had been moored before the seizure. Yellow police tape fluttered in the evening breeze. The setting sun cast long shadows across the water, turning it into a canvas of crimson and gold. This place that should have represented joy now felt like a monument to betrayal. She wrapped her cardigan tighter around herself as the chill from the water seeped into her bones. 3 days had passed since the IRS agents had appeared at her door, yet the numbness hadn't subsided. If anything, it had crystallized into something harder, colder. The financial records she'd examined that morning kept flashing through her mind, transaction after transaction, each one another nail in the coffin of her marriage. Most devastating were the forged signatures. Her name, written in an almost perfect imitation of her own hand. The ultimate betrayal, not just lying to her, but becoming her, using her name to authorize the destruction of their future. "I thought I might find you here," a voice said behind her. Eleanor didn't need to turn. After 30 years of marriage, Rich's voice was as familiar to her as her own heartbeat. She'd heard it laughing, whispering, arguing, comforting, but never with this broken edge. When she finally faced him, she was shocked by his appearance. Rich looked as though he had aged years in just days. The designer clothes he'd taken to wearing were gone, replaced by the familiar jeans and button-down shirt she had always known. His eyes were rimmed with red, his shoulders slumped with the weight of consequences finally settling upon them. Gone was the confident man who had breezed through their kitchen just weeks ago. This Rich seemed hollowed out, diminished. It was as if the facade had cracked, revealing the frightened man who had been hiding behind it all along. "Michael called me," he said, maintaining a careful distance. "He told me you'd found out everything." Eleanor turned back to the water, watching a seagull dive for its evening meal. How simple that existence seemed, no betrayals, no complex webs of lies. "Why, Rich?" she finally asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. 30 years together. All our plans. All our dreams. Her voice faltered briefly as she remembered the European trip they'd been planning for years. "Why would you throw it all away?" Rich took a shuddering breath. "I was scared," he admitted, his voice breaking. "The company was my identity for so long. Once it was gone, who was I? Just another old man with money in the bank." He moved to stand beside her, both of them gazing out at the water. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that she could smell the familiar scent of his aftershave, the same brand he'd used since their first anniversary when she'd given it to him as a gift. "James made me feel important again," Rich continued. "Like I still mattered in the world. Like I wasn't just disappearing." The vulnerability in his confession hit Eleanor harder than any excuse could have. For a moment, she could see the scared boy inside the man, the one who had grown up poor, who had built his company from nothing, who had always feared returning to that nothing. "You mattered to me," Eleanor said, tears finally breaking through her composed facade. All the strength she'd maintained through the meetings with IRS agents, financial advisors, and lawyers crumbled in an instant. "You always mattered to me, Rich. Wasn't that enough?" The question hung between them, heavier than any accusation. A family walked past them on the dock, a young couple with matching wedding bands and a toddler between them. Eleanor felt a sharp pain in her chest, not for children they never had, but for the innocence of beginnings, for the pure faith that couples still had in each other. The faith she and Rich had once shared. "I see that now," Rich whispered, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But it might be too late. I might go to prison, Ellie. I signed those papers. I knew what I was doing wasn't right, but I did it anyway." Eleanor turned to fully face him. This man she had loved for 30 years, her partner, her confidant, her future, now stood before her as both a stranger and a painfully familiar ghost of the person she had married. "That's the difference between us, Rich," she said, the realization crystallizing as she spoke. "You knew it wasn't right, but you did it anyway. If you had told me the truth from the beginning, I would have stopped you. We could have fixed it together, faced whatever came our way." Rich's face crumpled at her words. The truth of them seemed to wound him more deeply than any anger could have. He reached out as if to touch her hand, then stopped himself. "I didn't want to disappoint you," he said quietly. "You always saw the best in me. I didn't want you to see how scared I was." Eleanor felt her heart constrict. "The disappointment isn't that you were scared, Rich. The thing is, you didn't trust me enough to be afraid." Between them yawned the magnitude of his betrayal, an unbridgeable chasm. It wasn't just about the money, although that loss was devastating. It was about the trust they had built over 3 decades. The partnership they had crafted together. The simple, fundamental promise to face life's challenges side by side. The silent stretch between them, broken only by the gentle lapping of waves against the dock and the distant cry of seagulls. "What happens now?" he finally asked, his voice small against the vast emptiness that had opened between them. Eleanor's eyes drifted to the empty slip where the yacht had been, the physical symbol of their shattered future. The space seemed to mock them both with its emptiness, a void where their dreams had once been moored. "I don't know," she answered honestly. "But whatever happens, I need to protect myself now." The words hung between them like a final judgment. Rich nodded slowly, accepting this new reality, one where they stood on opposite sides of a divide neither of them had ever imagined would exist. As the last light faded from the sky, Eleanor turned to leave. Each step away from him felt like she was walking into an uncertain darkness, but staying would mean surrendering to a lie she could no longer live with. "Ellie," Rich called after her, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. For everything." She paused but didn't turn back. The weight of the past 3 days, the discoveries, the revelations, the endless questions from investigators, pressed down on her shoulders. She thought of the signature she'd seen that morning, her own name, written in someone else's hand, authorizing the destruction of everything they'd built. "I know you are," she said quietly. "But sometimes sorry isn't enough." With those words, she continued walking, her shadow stretching long behind her as she left the marina, and perhaps her old life, behind. Behind her, Rich remained at the railing, a solitary figure against the darkening sky. As she reached her car, Eleanor caught her reflection in the window, a woman she barely recognized, with tired eyes and a determined set to her jaw. Somewhere beneath the shock and grief, a kernel of strength had begun to form. Whatever came next, the legal battles, the financial struggles, the rebuilding of a life, she would face it on her own terms. She was no longer the woman who had stood beside Rich Warren for 30 years. She was Eleanor Warren, standing alone. And somehow, she would find her way forward through the darkness. Justice and new courage. Eleanor sat across from Sarah as the setting sun turned Sarah's law office amber. Between them lay financial statements and legal filings, the paper trail of her unraveling life. "What's the next step?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier than she felt. "We protect what's left," Sarah replied. "The trust Michael showed you is secure. Rich set it up in your maiden name, which keeps it separate from other assets. Eleanor nodded, tracing her finger along a document. It's strange. After everything, that trust is the one thing he did right. The prosecutor called today, Sarah said. With Rich's testimony, they've identified at least 4 other victims of James's scheme. Wealthy men who sold businesses and suddenly found themselves with expensive toys and empty accounts. At least I'm not alone, Eleanor said with a bitter smile. By the way, Sarah asked, Second Wind was its name, right? Do you know what will happen to it? It'll probably be auctioned, Eleanor replied. To recover some of its value. Are you interested in it? Sarah's question was careful. I am, Eleanor said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Not for revenge. I just don't want it to end as a symbol of his vanity. Sarah studied her friend's face, seeing something new there, not just determination, but purpose. The courtroom's solemn atmosphere wrapped around Eleanor like a heavy blanket. She sat perfectly straight, Sarah beside her. Across the aisle, Rich sat with his lawyer. He looked smaller somehow, diminished in his navy suit. When their eyes met briefly, she saw regret and shame. All rise, the bailiff called. The judge entered and motioned for everyone to sit. Mr. Warren, I understand you've agreed to a plea arrangement with the prosecution. Rich stood. Yes, Your Honor. The prosecutor outlined the agreement. Rich would plead guilty and testify against James Morris. In exchange, they recommended 18 months instead of 5 years. How do you plead? The judge asked. Rich glanced at Eleanor. Guilty, Your Honor. The judge nodded sternly. You've admitted to tax evasion and financial fraud, serious crimes. Your cooperation is noted. Without it, a harsher sentence would be warranted. The court sentences you to 18 months in a federal correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised release, and imposes a fine of $250,000. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, James Morris was arrested in Miami last night. Mr. Warren's testimony has enabled us to dismantle Morris's entire fraud network. Eleanor felt a wave of relief. At least there was some justice. As proceedings ended, Eleanor's path crossed with Rich's. He spoke just 2 words as officers prepared to lead him away. I'm sorry. She nodded and walked out with her back straight and head high. On the courthouse steps, Sarah touched her arm. Are you all right? Still shaking, Eleanor admitted. But there's something else too, like a weight lifting. It's not over, but at least we're moving forward. I have something for you, Michael said as Eleanor entered his makeshift office. He slid a folder across the desk. Rich asked me to give you this when the time was right. Inside were trust documents and bank statements. Eleanor's breath caught as she recognized her maiden name, Eleanor Green, on the accounts. What is this? She asked. A retirement account Rich set up 5 years before selling the company, Michael explained. In your maiden name, untouchable by creditors or legal proceedings. Why didn't he tell me? Michael pointed to a note in Rich's handwriting, to Ellie. Your future is safe with me. For the woman who works too hard, someday I hope you'll rest. You have more than I could ever imagine. The account contained $350,000, not enough to replace what they'd lost, but enough to provide her with security. In all his reckless spending, he had protected this one thing. After selling the company, he felt lost, Michael said quietly. Like his identity vanished overnight. James made him feel important again. But this account, he said it was absolute. He would never touch it. Eleanor wiped away a tear. One good choice among all his bad ones. Not enough, Michael acknowledged. But something. She nodded. I need to see him before he goes to prison. The visiting room at the jail was bleak and inorganic. Eleanor waited until Rich was brought in. He looked older, thinner, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Thank you for coming, he said. Why didn't you tell me about the trust? She asked directly. I wanted it to be a surprise someday. Ironic, isn't it? The one thing I truly did for you was smaller than all I did for myself. That trust is your only redemption, Eleanor said. In all your spending and schemes, it was the one thing you did thinking solely of me. Rich nodded. It was insurance. I could sell everything else, but that was your future. I couldn't touch it. I heard they arrested James. He had at least 5 other victims. Same pattern, men who sold companies and suddenly had a new investment advisor. He was good at finding vain men with fragile egos. Like you. Yes, Rich admitted. I understand what I've done, Eleanor. I ruined our plans. I endangered you. I broke 30 years of trust. Eleanor studied him, the remnants of the man she had loved. We'll have to sell the house. For your fines and my legal fees. He nodded. I know. I'm going to rebuild, she said with quiet determination. I don't know what that looks like yet, but I'll figure it out. Rich met her eyes directly. I broke so many promises. But I kept just one. What's that? I wanted to protect you, even in the middle of my mistakes. The trust was my way of saying that no matter what happened, you would be safe. Eleanor gave a light laugh. Ironic. You nearly destroyed me while trying to save me. As she stood to leave, she added softly, not everything you did was selfish. That means something, at least. Eleanor arranged accounting books on the small desk in her temporary home. At 58, she was starting over, a part-time position at a local accounting firm, a modest space of her own, and a future entirely different from what she had planned. The phone rang. Mrs. Warren? This is Victoria Simmons from the local women's center. Yes, we spoke, Eleanor answered. About the workshop based on my personal experience. We're honored to have someone like you, Victoria said. Many women become targets of financial fraud, especially during divorce or after losing a spouse. Your expertise is invaluable. Eleanor smiled, fidgeting with a notepad. I hardly feel like an expert. I was a victim myself. That's precisely why your voice matters, Victoria replied firmly. Lived experience is more valuable than theory. After the call, Eleanor sat on the guesthouse veranda with a cup of mint tea, thinking about what to tell the group. Warning signs. The right questions to ask. What to do when something feels wrong. Her phone rang again. This time from the prison. Rich called every Wednesday. Sometimes she answered. Sometimes she didn't. Today she decided to pick up. Ellie, how are you? Rich's voice sounded more energetic than usual. I'm doing well, she answered. I have a job. Running a workshop at the Women's Center about family finances. That's wonderful. You'll be great at teaching. Always smarter than me. She smiled. I found a new place to live. It's small, but it's mine. I'm glad, Rich said. You know, I'm taking this financial responsibility course here. Everything you always said was right. I was a fool. Well, at least you recognize that now, Eleanor said. Eleanor, do you think you'll ever forgive me? His voice was uncertain. I mean, I understand if you don't. But I had to ask. Eleanor looked across the garden at Linda. Her sister had always been her support. I think forgiveness and forgetting are different things, Rich, she finally said. I'm still figuring out how. The small community center buzzed with activity. Eleanor stood at the entrance, nervously adjusting her blazer. A sign above the door read, Financial Literacy for New Beginnings, Workshop Series. This is fantastic, Caroline said beside her, arranging workbooks on a table. What if nobody comes? Eleanor whispered. They will. Trust me. Over the past year and a half, Eleanor's life had transformed in ways she never imagined. Her part-time accounting work had evolved into a small practice of her own, specializing in helping women understand and control their finances. Today was her first public workshop. The door opened. A woman in her 60s entered hesitantly. Then another, and two more. Within 15 minutes, all the chairs were filled, mostly women, many around Eleanor's age, some younger, all wearing the same mixture of determination and anxiety. Welcome, Eleanor began, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. My name is Eleanor Warren. 18 months ago, I discovered my husband had used our life savings to buy a yacht that was later seized by the IRS. I am no longer a victim, I am a survivor. And I'm here to help you understand your finances so you don't need to rely on anyone else to secure your future. The room filled with murmurs of recognition and understanding nods. I'll tell you the most important thing in this classroom, Eleanor continued. Even the people we love most can sometimes betray us. But by knowing ourselves, we can rise again. After the workshop, as Eleanor gathered her materials, a participant approached her. I can relate to your story, she said. I'm in the middle of a divorce. Without your advice, I think I would have made mistakes. Thank you. Eleanor smiled. We're not alone. Another woman approached. Thanks to you, I finally found the courage to file for divorce. I just realized it's better to be on my own than with him. Across the room, Caroline beamed with pride. By the door, a well-dressed man approached. Eleanor immediately recognized Rich, thinner, with whiter hair, but taller than when she had last seen him in the visiting room. You came, she said with surprise. Their first face-to-face meeting since his release from prison. Said I would, Rich maintained a respectful distance. You were amazing in there, Ellie. Those women were really listening to you. Eleanor felt a mixture of complicated emotions. The anger had faded with time, transforming into something like quiet understanding, if not complete forgiveness. Michael told me you're staying with him, she asked. Rich nodded. Just until I get on my feet. I have an interview next week. Nothing fancy, construction management again, starting at the bottom. An awkward silence fell between them. I heard you bought a small condo, Rich finally said. Near the beach. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. The emphasis on the last words wasn't lost on either of them. Eleanor? We don't need to have that conversation today, she gently interrupted. Rich nodded, accepting her boundary. I'm proud of what you've built, he said instead, gesturing to the room where women were still talking. You're helping people. I'm helping myself too, Eleanor admitted. Each workshop reminds me how far I've come. Sold, the auctioneer declared, bringing down the gavel. Lot 152, second wind, to an anonymous bidder for $200,000. From the back of the hall, Eleanor smiled slightly behind her sunglasses. Beside her, Sarah wore an expression of surprise. You really did it? Sarah whispered. You bought the yacht? I bought it anonymously, Eleanor quietly corrected. And tomorrow, I'm donating it to a veteran marine conservation group. They'll use it for scientific research. Sarah let out an admiring breath. Why? Eleanor gazed at the yacht, now hers, transformed from a symbol of her life's collapse to a symbol of new purpose. What James used that boat to take from us, I'm using it to give something back to the world, she said. Isn't that the real meaning of a second wind? A fresh start. A new direction. As they left the auction hall, Eleanor noticed a sensation expanding in her chest, not closure, but rather the beginning of something new. You know, she told Sarah, what I teach those women applies to me too. An ending isn't necessarily an end at all, just the beginning of something new.